Okay, so workflows and clouds. So what are some of the benefits of clouds for workflows? Why would you want to run workflows in the cloud? One of the big ones is this custom execution environment. Like I said earlier, workflows are often put together from a lot of diverse components. And these components are often legacy codes, and they have really picky requirements in terms of the environment that they run in. They may require specific compilers or specific libraries, versions of libraries. And getting these components put together to run an application like this in, say, a grid environment where you don't control the system level software can be really difficult sometimes. And so it's nice in the cloud, and I'm specifically talking about infrastructure clouds here, that you can specify that environment yourself. You have total control over it, and you can customize, say, a VM image to suit your particular application. And you can put everything in there that you need. And I've seen recently people going to this model of, instead of giving you my software, which actually depends on a lot of other software, I'll give you a virtual machine image because it's too hard to set up yourself. So a lot of scientific codes are that way. It's just too difficult to get all the ecosystem in place to run the application. Another benefit is provisioning. So workflows over time, they have bottlenecks in them. The resource needs of the workflow change over time, and I'll give an example in a few slides of that. So it's nice to be able to provision resources on demand. So in a grid environment, say, or a local cluster, you submit your work to the cluster, and you face these sort of unknown, unbounded wait times as you wait in the batch queue to run. But in the cloud, you sort of request resources and you get them right now. And this is nice also for workflows because as the workflow is running, you get to a stage where maybe it fans out and you can use more resources in parallel. It's nice to be able to go out to the cloud and request those. And now in large commercial clouds, you maybe have a harder time finding the bottom because they have so many resources. But like Lavanya said a little while ago, scientists, they sort of always want more. So this is something that may not be possible in all cases. You always want to request more resources than are available. Another benefit is reproducibility. So VM images, like I said, they capture all of the software components that go into running an application. And that's really great for reproducibility because later on, if you have a VM image and you've produced some results that you publish in a paper or something, you can always go back and look at that image as long as you had the foresight to save it and say, what version of the code was I running when I produced those numbers? And so you can go back and look at that image and find out exactly what it was. You can also, like I said, share the images. You can send them to your collaborators, and they can run them themselves. And you can store it as part of the provenance. So provenance is a big issue in workflow systems, and provenance has to do with what is the history of a data product. How was that product produced? And so we looked at storing VM images as part of the provenance. And there are some provenance tools that have support for this, so that you can go back and say, not only did this version of the software produce it, but I actually have that software here in this VM image stored with the provenance so that I can resurrect it later. And then finally, in the area of commercial clouds, there's economic benefits. So like I said, in grids, you have to kind of wait for resources. But in commercial clouds, they allow you to sort of pay instead of waiting. So if I need to do it now, instead of waiting in a batch queue for a while, I can just pay and get an image up on a VM up running on Amazon, say, and run my workflow. There's also this idea of no premium to scale, which means that it costs the same to run, say, on one image for 8 hours or one VM for 8 hours as it does to run on 8 for 1 hour. So you're flexible, and if you have an application that is flexible in how it can be shaped, like workflows are, then you can use more resources in parallel, and you don't have to pay. Say if you're going to allocate these, buy these resources, hardware yourself. And finally, there's also cost-performance trade-offs. You can choose to pay more to get the results faster, or you can pay less and maybe it'll take a little bit longer to run your work. And there's also drawbacks, of course, and these aren't necessarily always all specific to workflows, but I think Lavanya touched on this earlier. Administration is still a big issue in infrastructure clouds. So even though you get control over the environment, now you're responsible for the environment as well. And I think for a lot of science users, this is sort of more than they would like to take on. So there's a lot of additional burden in administering these VM images and setting them up and making sure everything's up and running correctly. There's a lot of complexity as well. So I'm going to talk about deploying workflows in a second. And doing that is actually, there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of parts and a lot of configuration that you have to get right. And doing that in a distributed environment is really, really difficult. Provisioning, like I said, provisioning was a benefit, but it's also a problem too, because the nice thing about having batch resources is that you can submit your work there and you forget about it, and you know that later on it's going to take care of itself and it's going to finish and you're going to get the results. In the cloud, you have to launch the images, run your work, and then you have to come back later and make sure that all the images terminated and cleaned up. And if you have to run more than one VM to run applications in parallel, then you have to have some way to manage that. And I'll say a little bit in a while about dynamic provisioning, and so that's another thing that you have to worry about. And then also cost performance trade-offs, I also identified that as a benefit, but it's another thing to think about when you're running on a commercial cloud. You have to worry about, am I using the most cost-effective resource? Am I doing this the cheapest way I can? And so that's a bit of a challenge. Performance-wise, Lavanya had a lot to say about this a minute ago. So there is overhead in virtualization. A lot of commercial clouds use commodity resources that are not HPC high-end resources, with InfiniBand and things like that. So that's something you have to worry about. And I'll have a lot more to say about that in a little while when I get on to cost and performance studies that we've done. And then there's other issues such as vendor lock-in. If you develop your application specifically for, say, Amazon, then it makes it hard to move it to other systems. And security, which is maybe a concern for people that are doing workflows in, say, biomedical workflows and things.